which is another wow factor because it's fun and fast and kicks ass.
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
Well, welcome back to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. Today, my guest is Brooke Lizotte. Brooke is a keyboard player, we'll say based out of Seattle, but he's going to explain more to that. Brooke, thank you for making this happen.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So, Brooke, we're sitting here in a studio, which you gave me a tour of, which was amazing to me. How I know about you, and this is always the fun part, we get to pick on Raymond Hayden. Raymond gets mentioned in a lot of the episodes, but Ray said you need to talk to Brooke, and here I am. And it took quite a while for me to actually get around to reaching out to you, but I'd like to know, how did you meet Ray? And tell our listeners some dirt. We need dirt on Ray.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of dirt on Ray.
Perfect.
But, I'll be careful.
All right. And I'm just kidding.
No, I am too.
For Ray, I told Ray I'd tease him. All right. So I'll probably cut that. I'll probably leave that in. We'll just leave it there. So Brooke, how you also know another friend of mine, a long-term friend of mine, Renee Fabre.
Yes, went to school with Renee.
Okay. So let's go back that far.
Okay.
How did you get started in music? What's your story?
Well, that moment in life was in college.
Okay.
Green River College in like 70, 71, 2, 3 in there. And Renee's a wonderful fella and a wonderful pianist. He has a couple of chords that every time back then when he would play his chord, I called it, his voicing, it was just absolutely heaven.
Okay.
And to this day, I would like him to show me that chord.
All right.
But anyway,
okay.
Renee was a real good friend. We haven't really been in touch through the years, but it feels like we have because that was a very special time. And the band was great. Band happened to collect kids. We were 18 years old who played. I had already been playing hard all their life. So the youngsters, us back then, came in, playing hard and wanting to play, and real good. And the band basically exploded immediately, being great. The jazz ensemble, and that ended up touring up and down the coast, and the various festivals and college conferences and contests. And there was who was a great band leader. Anyway, some of them would do their contests or, get together, and then bands from all over the country would come down. Stan Kenton had one.
Okay. And
we were a couple of times in there, and we'd roll in and just kick ass. And so that area, that was college. But I go back, I started when I was about 5. And
okay.
My roots are Beethoven and Chopin.
Okay.
But the old man who taught me, I stayed with for years. I mean, I studied with him until I was in my late teens. William Coburn up in the U District here in Seattle. I grew up on Queen Anne Hill.
Okay.
And he was, and I didn't know this until I was growing up, was a wise old guy. And he was old then, like he was in his 60s. I mean, I was 5. And so somebody, he was ancient. And fast forward to now, 60 was a while ago. I remember it well. And, but he was ancient, but we just became, he didn't have kids. So we just bonded because I happened to wanted to play.
Okay.
And so I was one of those students for him who came in hungry and came back as prepared as I could be next week.
Unlike little Timmy, whose mom was making him play, and he didn't want to.
And I wanted to.
What do you think was what was the draw for you? Why do you think it?
I think it's in your bones or not.
Okay.
I think it's, I don't know if that's meaning it's,
you were just kind of born to do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all I've ever done. And, And so he would play things, and if he could see this kid get a rise out of it, he'd put that aside. And then if something else didn't, we wouldn't even approach it. And he was going through kind of the pop hits of those great classical composers. Okay. We didn't go deep into any particular composer. He brought up Moonlight Sonata.
Okay.
And he brought up, the Minute Waltz. And he brought up for Chopin. And he brought up Grieg's Concerto in A minor. And he brought up the ones that are kind of were their hits.
Mm-hmm.
I call it, it isn't technically true, but kind of what the classical pop hits of the time for those guys.
Okay.
And he would, he's a story in himself. But one thing he did along with the classical stuff, and it tended to be, so he would see the ones that I really just bounced at, and we'd learn those. And he might have to rewrite them and transcribe them, because if I'm holding my hand out, my 5 fingers spread, every pianist has some reach.
Mm-hmm.
From tip of thumb to a tip of little finger goes as far as your hand does. Some less, some more.
Right.
But a 5-year-old, I'm taking my thumb away now.
Right. You have a much smaller reach.
There's your reach.
Right.
So he would completely rewrite these pieces to fit a little hand. And his manuscript was breathtaking. He was old school.
Okay.
So his penmanship musically, I still have pieces that he rewrote for me.
Okay.
And I show them to people, and that's a bygone art. Mm-hmm. Although people still scratch quickly live in studio. I mean, so a penmanship is important, but not like that.
We all type everything now or text it to each other.
Yeah. And there's Finale, and there's several now that do spit out charts.
Okay.
That are, and so back to that. So, but one thing he did back then was that he gave me boogie woogie. Dun 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 dun, but whatever.
Right.
And he would selectively play things, and if I dug that one, we'd learn that one.
Okay.
Because what that did for me, and he knew I'd need it, because kids want to get out and play, and there's, they had nothing to do inside back in the 50s. So, you want to get outside and ride a bike and throw a ball and ride on, build. And back then, skateboards, you had to make your own. and just whatever, be with your friends. So he knew that there'd be competition for my wanting to practice. And he appreciated that I had a built-in want to practice.
Okay.
But he gave me a boogie woogie because my pals, girls and boys, loved that stuff. So they'd want to come in while I was practicing. So my front room always had people in it with me practicing. So it was this peer pressure, peer support.
Okay.
That made me want to go back to him next week and show him what I did and, how good I was. And, Lord knows, I mean, some of it, he was quite gracious, and I learned a lot from him because, I probably hit far more wrong notes than right notes because you're 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and on. And he said, yes, he'd compliment what I did right. He said, this part right here, that's very nice. Yeah, and let's work on that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then he said, now let's work on this part. He didn't say this sucked.
Right.
But we'd start evolving what I did well so I could take it another step. Mm-hmm. And then we'd go into the hard stuff that I really maybe didn't even get too much.
Okay.
So his critique was a really important part of anything. Whoever critiques your work, hopefully they're good. Hopefully they give you support and then constructive criticism. Easier said than done sometimes, depending on who's delivering that and who's receiving it.
Sure. Well, I think as a young child, my mom wanted me to play piano, and I just didn't want to. It just didn't. I regret that at this point of my life, but at 7, 8, didn't want to. My mother wasn't a trained piano instructor. So
Right.
there was some.
Yeah, nobody in my family was.
Yeah.
Was.
So did you have a piano in the home?
Yeah.
You did have, and did they get that for you, or was it already there?
No, there was one there because my older brothers. I'm the baby in the lot. The older brothers and one sister, they all had lessons. Now she didn't know Coburn then.
Mm-hmm.
And she tells story or did of the whack of the ruler on the back of the hands, and some of my siblings had that experience where it was a crotchety old gal who was mean, and she didn't want me to have that, so she looked around and she found a good one, but there was a piano there, and she tells stories of me, back when, the keyboard I'd bump my head on the keyboard when you're small.
Right.
But she tells stories of me, my hands are above my head, reaching up and playing and finding melodies.
So you really, at a very young age, this was natural to you.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I enjoyed that thing up there and the sounds it made. And so, and then I would right away, I would play again, the rehearsals, my private practice would become, half a dozen of my friends were hanging out. And I say, now be quiet here. Or she would say, you can stay boys, but be quiet.
Okay.
Or girls. And there was always a mix. And then I would give house concerts. And I have some pictures of those.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, it's just, and the girls and the guys, everybody's got on their Sunday best and they're looking sharp,
And how old were you about this time?
Oh, 7 or 8 or 9.
Okay.
And he would do recitals.
Okay.
And in his home, University District, which had the upstairs beautiful piano, would hold, 50 chairs. He would empty it out and put chairs in there. And everybody's parents and friends and aunts and uncles would come, and he'd do a theme and he'd play a little bit and then have us do something. And so there was a lot of early performances.
Okay. And then when you moved on, say, to high school?
Yeah, well, junior high.
Okay.
I was 13, 7th grade, and hadn't played anything but boogie woogie and classical.
Okay.
And some Mancini, Baby Elephant Walk. We moved into some pop themes, Exodus theme.
Okay.
Cobra, and I still have those, that sheet music, when it's 20 cents, that kind of thing. It's really good. But I met some guys in, somehow, I have to ask them how I met, but there was a band on Queen Anne called the Neurotics. It was all the rave. And played all the sock hops and the teen fairs and the community centers and the sock hops after school and street fairs and what have you. And they somehow discovered that I played.
Okay.
And so they came over to my house one day. And back then, the rule, I was 13 years old. A couple of them were in high school. One was in junior high. And that's probably where the connection was, because the rest of the boys were in high school. And they found out that I played, and they came over, and I didn't know kind of what to play for them. So I played, this hairy, piece, Grieg's Concerto in A minor. Dun, 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 dun. It's classic intro.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hair raising, so there was a wow factor. And then I played Bumble Boogie.
Okay.
Which is another wow factor because it's fun and fast and kicks ass. And so I was hired. And back then, you got into the band if you had gear. It didn't matter how well you played. And I didn't know. I mean, I had a good ear because I had been playing already for 10, 13, 5, 8 years.
8 years, right.
So I had a good ear. And I could pick up stuff real quick. So it was, the din, 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 din. Oh, that was the way I was playing pop music, was the rock and roll stuff.
Okay.
And Dad got me a Vox Continental organ, which turns out to be one of the classics.
Okay.
You either had a Vox Continental or a Farfisa. The Doors had a Farfisa.
Okay.
The Dave Clark Five and John Lennon had a Vox.
Okay.
So it was one or the others. The soul guys had the Hammond B3.
Okay.
The R&B and jazz guys, or gospel.
Right.
And, but it was rock and roll. And, the Stones and the Temptations and the whatevers, Beatles. And the Northwest, there was a Northwest sound that was rock and jazz blend. Mm-hmm. And it kind of still is kind of rock and jazz blend. So that has stuck. That's kind of part and parcel of what's happening up here. And blues tossed into there. But they came over, so I was in. And we played all those. I got great pictures of that too. And then, and in there, and then that went its way. And I ended up getting a B3.
Okay.
And that turned on a whole other areas of music. And I fell, and I started getting funky, and rock and roll changed. It became, Zepp and Stevie Winwood and Jethro Tull and Stones and Hendrix, and things started getting. I discovered Herbie Hancock, a young Herbie, mm-hmm. which I dug immediately, and then on it went. And they're friends of mine, African American family, the Browns. I met when I was 18. I was 18, 17 in 69, and I graduated in 70. So I was 18 then. And that was a great time to be studying rock and roll and funk and R&B, because mm-hmm. those were the classic guys. Mm-hmm. And so I was, deep in it and just loved it, and was playing real hard, playing my best I could. And that's about that time is where I went to college and met Renee.
Okay.
So the Green River College was that band in school.
Okay.
It was in 70. But I met Coleman Brown and his family and cousins. It was the Browns. And they're soulful and bluesy, and that's what they were all about. Mm-hmm. Otis Redding, James Brown. Mm-hmm. And I played B3, and I got a clavinet pretty quickly thereafter, which is a funk machine. Clavinet is the funk machine that's not organ.
Okay.
Stevie Wonder, mm-hmm. Superstitious, clavinet.
Clavinet. Okay.
Legendary in the funk, and then everybody had a clav if you were funky.
Okay.
Still do. In fact, I got a 72 clav sitting out there that's funky as you want to know.
All right.
But I met Coleman, Coleman really, and then he invited me down. There's a club down on 2nd and Union called The Vault, which was legendary downstairs. And 18 and over, and all they sold was potato chips and Coca-Cola. And kids, from the Navy. It was that kind of place.
All right.
And in Septimus, the owner, Ronnie, leaving me right now, but he's a legend, kind of plays sax and lived to a ripe old age. But that was his club, and he loved the Browns. Mm-hmm. And they were called Just Us at the time, and I somehow connected with them, and I hauled the B3 down, and I could play and kick ass, and we just became the best friends. So it was Ronald Brown, Coleman Brown, Frankie Brown, Herman Brown, Cynthia Brown, Lily Brown, and Brooke. So I was adopted, and have played with them off and on since. The bass player, Ronald, plays with our Wednesday night jam.
Okay.
So I've played with him since I was 18.
All right.
And then things got funky. And then I brought my blend of funk and rock and classical and God knows what to the jazz band, and stayed with it through the 2 years. It's a 2-year school. Mm-hmm. And stopped taking any other classes. So I stayed there for another year or two, coming back to be the anchor man, mm-hmm. do the ensemble, because I was learning a lot from it. The director and I were best friends. It was traveling and doing the festivals and working hard to be good. And so I enjoyed it.
Okay.
So I stayed long past really going to school. I just came to sign up for that. And then on went life.
Well, let's before we go on with life, let's talk about Seattle in the late 60s, early 70s musically. What were you experiencing here? What did you
Well,
see?
one, I couldn't get into clubs.
Right.
So it was, from afar. But the band at that point, the Neurotics, up into, well, they were doing clubs, but you could do clubs. But you, as a kid, in which we all were underage, you had to stay on stage in the break, be right next to the stage at a designated table with a chauffeur, or in the green room with a chauffeur. And so I didn't go to clubs.
Okay.
And so at that point, what I was, I saw there was a Dave Lewis trio. There was a couple of organ gods who were just great. Of course, Louie came out of this region. And the Sonics and the Wailers, they were Tacoma.
Yes. Tacoma
had more of a blue collar, attitude, and kind of still does. I mean, that's probably genderfied, but back then it was kind of night and day.
Yes.
And those bands kicked ass. So that was that scene, and they were kind of that half generation older than me. And a lot of these kids were, because I was just playing so young at a young age that I was involved, but they were older. Vietnam took some of them away. That's when the Neurotics stopped, guitar player went off.
Okay.
And he returned, but the band had ended. So the scene was jazz and R&B, and I was able to kind of know of it, one step removed, because I was I was adopted by the Browns.
Right.
So I was in, that world and well received. I mean, I might be the only white guy in some clubs we played.
Okay.
And so you got to be funky. If you're the only white guy on stage, you got to hold up that end of the stage, or you're going to get cackled from it. And so, knock on wood, I could.
He held it. What did you do after Green River?
70s. I had a band called Bridges.
Okay.
That was the local, collectively, the finest players around us. And that ended up being managed. I wrote a lot in that band. That's when I started writing.
Okay.
And have ever since. Just my own material is what, and you ride that wave. If you don't hit a home run or two, then you're constantly working on the next project in almost any industry.
That's true.
And I was hitting some long balls and has, kept me afloat and feeding me until now.
Okay.
But in the process, some amazing moments. Bridges ended up being managed by Ulysses Lewis, Norm Vallotton, and now my still dear friend Sid Clark, as a co-writer, but manager and helping Ulysses. There was a band called Ball and Jack.
Okay. That
ended up with national renown. And Sydney was their manager. And they were a rock and soul. That term, Seattle almost invented that. Rock and soul, rock and roll and soul band. Kicking ass but soulful, like a Sly and the Family Stone.
Okay.
Seattle, a lot of the bands were that just without trying. They just was. And so it was there. That scene was cool. And it's still kind of here.
Okay.
Jazzy, but funky, but rocky, but, And so that was, that was all around us. And Bridges was that eclectic blend. And Ulysses owned the Paramounts.
Oh.
This one, the one in Portland.
Okay.
And one outside of San Francisco, called Warner Theater.
All right.
And his dream, and was realized during that era, was that he would have bands come up and down, and Bridges he managed us, and he would put us on front, 30 minutes, 40 minutes in front of anybody who'd let us. They'd coming through. If they didn't have an opener, he'd say, well, you got an opener? No, we don't. Well, he said, I got a really good band. I mean, they'll do how long you want. half hour, 40 minutes. We had a lot of that. And we would get on, not complain about having no room on stage, because you don't move the headliner's gear. They've taken all day to get right. If you're going to be a opening band, you squeeze in next to the monitor and don't don't ask for much. and our sound men and our stage crew, we were well endowed that way. They were polite and minded their business, and they were really sharp. So immediately the crews knew that they knew what they were doing. So they were good politically for us. We would walk on stage and we'd be ready to go. And the house loved them, and that ends up giving you a little bit more oomph in the monitors, a little bit more lights. You don't get the specials. You don't get the fancy stuff. They're not going to drop any of that on you. That's for the headliner. And boy, there's more stories than we have time for there.
Well, give me an example of who was the headliner you guys opened for.
We did a number of dates with Bob Marley.
Really?
And his first time through the States. And that changed my life, because there was a fellow who was committed to his material to the point of, he was shot at and he left Jamaica because they were after him.
Right.
Federales, it was like, this guy's talking trash to us. Let's go get him. And they tried. They came into his compound, guns blazing. I don't know if you know any of that story.
I did not know that story.
And so that's when he left, went to London.
So you opened for Bob Marley.
Yeah. And who else do we do? There's Dylan was in that lot. Bootsy Collins came out of Parliament Funkadelic.
Yeah.
There's stories there too. There's stories on all of these.
All of these.
And who else do we do? The Four Tops, Richie Havens. Who is Joan Collins? Because the band was quite able to carve our set list out, all our own material.
Okay.
Mostly mine.
Okay.
And so we could get funky, or we could get rocky, or we could get kind of, ballad-ish.
Bring in the clowns.
Yeah, a little bit. And we didn't have to hit it hard. We could get kind of jazzy, comfortably. We could go there. I mean, we weren't a jazz band, but we could get jazzy.
Okay.
A difference. I'm not a jazz bow, but I can play into that.
Okay.
I can get jazzy. And because jazz bows know all those songs, and I don't. My repertoire is my own material.
All right.
So I'm not good going into a piano bar thing where somebody calls out Misty.
All right. Yeah.
So I don't put myself there. But anyway, just who else do we play for? Oh, I'd have to think.
Well, that's quite the list.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's in that realm.
So did you play with? So were you playing at the Paramount in Portland as well? And
yes.
Did you go down to San Francisco? Were you playing
Warner?
You were playing all three of these.
Yeah. And
venues.
he also was connected to Queen Elizabeth, the Opera House in Vancouver, BC.
Oh wow!
So we played the Queen on different events, and the Commodore Ballroom. There was a ballroom here called the Eagles, and the Commodore was Vancouver's Eagles.
Gotcha.
Where everybody played that couldn't do. I don't know if they had a bigger theater in Vancouver, because it must have been the Queenie, because Marley played the Queenie, and Buffy St. Marie. We played with her, and that was at the Queenie. But the Commodore was fun. It was the Rock Hall, like the Eagles here was.
Never saw anything at the Eagles. Renee has told me a story of he sat on the floor while the Grateful Dead were playing at the Eagles
Nice
auditorium, and I'm like,
yeah, I saw the Clash up in Vancouver.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, that London calling tour.
Oh,
Funny thing is that they weren't in the Commodore, but they were in the Commodore size, kind of like small ice arena.
right.
That not a big rink,
Right.
not a big stadium / ice rink, but and place was packed, of course. But I was pleased to see, surprised to see as well. The Clash came on, and they weren't very loud. They didn't play loud. The PA had them loud enough to fill the room,
Mm-hmm.
but we were used to some ear-shattering music then.
Okay.
Where there's a stack of Marshalls, and they did not need a stack of Marshalls, but nobody knew that then. And the Clash was surprisingly I appreciated it because in that time frame, Marley wasn't loud. They were more like a countryman. They came in with their axes and rent Fender Twins and whatever they wanted and put those on stage somewhere. And because the loudest thing on stage for Marley were the voices, the I3, the ladies, and him, and the kick and the snare.
Okay.
And the rest kind of percolated and bubbled underneath that. But the voice it was voice on top, please. And the ladies' harmonies floated over everything, and they were not loud. Of course, the PA got them up out front.
Sure.
So it got loud enough out there.
But it wasn't.
Not on stage.
Not that giant wall.
You didn't have to
noise.
fight Marshalls.
Gotcha.
So, and Bridges wasn't that way.
All right.
And then the band after that, for me, it was called Zero Deals, half of Bridges, and just a trio that was a keyboard, drums, stack of 2 keyboards and drums. So that was an interesting progressive thing, funky but progressive. And that, because it was just me really, and the other keyboardist, Grant Reeves, Art Ford on drums, the other keyboardist was a wonderful keyboardist and one of the finest saxophone players I've ever played with, and flute. And so when he would go and his hands would get off the keyboards, one or the other of us on our synth, whichever synth, would play bass when the other was not.
Okay.
And if my hands were busy on piano or some other synth part, he'd cover bass, and that was worked out.
Okay.
And but he was quite good, just absolutely, and one of the kind of the best around. And but that was not allowed. It wasn't a Marshall band.
Okay.
So thankfully, I have friends that have lost a bunch of their hearing because that was their realm, and it wasn't mine. So my hearing, thank goodness, at 70, I'm okay. I can hear just fine.
You can hear just fine. I could go down so many rabbit holes on this because.
Well, so somewhere in 89.
All right.
In the 80s, I grew a family.
Okay.
And was playing. There's an art college here called Cornish.
Yes.
And I was over a decade. It was a little mini career from about late 70s. Who I met, an amazing dancer, and we became an item for quite some time. And she was just a brilliant modern dancer, and she plugged me into Cornish. And because of my instrumental, my solo piano ability to just go and play, just improvise now, play what you see, go. I was very comfortable with that. And I became their kind of main accompanist for their advanced modern classes. And it ended up being a job for me. And the kids started, popping out. And so I cultivated that and was at Cornish for about a decade. Okay. And then University of Washington. And where else? Private dance studios would hire me to come in. And because I could play rhythmically and melodically, where sometimes they want kunga, they'll have a percussionist come in. Well, I can go there. As you may know, piano is really a drum. It's 88 drums with different tones,
right,
or different notes, frequencies. So so I could go either way for them. So they were comfortable with me, and I was comfortable in the medium. And it is a beautiful medium. Dance and music and theater, it almost gets operatic. The stories get involved. We did some just beautiful concerts that I remember vividly through those years, because I would do their big choreographer would have a big concert plan for the end of the year, and I would write and perform the music, and either put it all on computer, so the pit was full of computers that I'd run, or solo if that was called for, and that was a wonderful time.
I'm laughing because all those computers are probably less computational power than your phone right there.
Right. A bunch of little, the little Macs.
Okay.
SE.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
And I always had 2 or 3 because in case that one always went down and I was ready. And then I moved to LA.
Why?
Because it just felt right.
Okay.
And the whole family moved down, and I was on a National Endowment grant.
Oh.
Writing for a national choreographer.
Okay.
That was, so I wasn't having to work. I had some freedom to where I could be and work, and I ended up getting a bit of a residency at Santa Monica College. Had a very powerful dance program, and as did UCLA, and from my kind of at that point a bit renowned within that small world.
Mm-hmm.
Modern dance is a very small world, and I was my interest in going to LA because my best friend was down there pitching, working in film and TV.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, that sounds good. And because clubs was kind of not my favorite place. It just, you don't make much of a living out of it. Unless now, I mean, then you could make a living. Although you had to work a lot to make it. And so I floating on this grant, a national grant, I took that opportunity to go and get down there and pick up the accompaniment, which was more lucrative and clean, fun, inspiring environment that, in effect, all I had to do was play and practice. So my chops, it was selfishly, as now with the Rendezvous. With my morning rendezvous that I do every day, have since COVID began. I mean, that's its own story. We might get to that.
We'll get to that.
but it's I come in early and practice for 2 or 3 hours, do the show, which is just me quietly in this sanctuary. It's the bizarrest damn thing. We'll get to that.
There's the teaser. We'll come
yeah.
to that. So down in LA, did you like living in LA?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was really good for me. It was fun. I have family and friends there.
Okay.
And you need that in the millions of people. That helps. That helps you be grounded. And I was plugged right in to where it was working for me. And stayed there a number of years. And then I opened a cafe, put my 9-foot piano in it, espresso bar, which the coffee scene was not in LA at all.
It's still not.
Yeah, no, it's not. Well, it is. People know what a latte is. They didn't know what a latte was. I had been in the coffee business just by attrition, because I knew the Stewart brothers, who became SBC, who became Seattle's Best Coffee, all SB, Stewart brothers.
Right.
And they were on this little teeny hole in the wall in Pier 70,
yes,
brewing their. They were called the Wet Whisker.
Yes.
And Dave, the brother, I was living in a loft downtown and was wandering around and smelled coffee. It smelled great. So I followed my nose, and it was him over there with this little red roaster in this little hole in the wall about as big as where we're sitting right here. And it smelled great. And I just said, hang out. This is new. What's this? And I was sipping his stuff. He had a little thing. And then I met a fella that managed one of his stores. Wet Whisker was a store. There weren't many, 1 or 2. And met that kid. And he was over by another loft I'd moved into. So this happened kind of quickly. Interesting. And so I got to know really good coffee and how to make it from the guys they were kind of the pioneers.
They were certainly the pioneers in this region. And coffee, I love coffee, so that's a great
And I was always their coffee was their aesthetic, the brew aesthetic, determines a coffee. It's like anything. Is what's your tequila taste like? Well, it tastes like different than somebody else's.
Right.
And And I always preferred, their aesthetic was a medium dark roast.
Mm-hmm.
And Starbucks was a little more of a French snap.
Mm-hmm.
And I preferred the thick, rich, calm of a little bit matte. It's not quite shiny. The oils aren't out yet, and that happens in 15 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And so point I'm making is that I got to be quite wise just by hanging around and being interested and seeing the different and having my favorites. And that little fast forward in that era, the Little Red Roaster was bought by Liebrick. His first name's leaving me. Lee? Anyway, I'll think of it. But who started Lighthouse Roasters. A wonderful, and he was Ed Liebrick. He was one of the original roasters at Starbucks. And he left Starbucks because he didn't agree with their aesthetic. He was a medium dark roast guy, like Stewart Brothers. And so he opened his own, and he bought that Little Red Roaster from Dave, or whoever, the Stewarts.
Right.
And that started Lighthouse up in Fremont. And I think he still has it because it's a legend, really. That's a legendary piece of Seattle folklore. And it probably still works, just cranks out just fine.
All right. So, question I always ask guests towards the end, but I'm just going to slide it in here because we're talking coffee. Where do you go for a good cup of coffee these days around here?
My stove.
Your stove. How are you preparing it?
With kind of an Italian, the original Italian.
Yes.
Take it apart in the middle.
Yes. That's how you're making your coffee.
Yeah.
And whose beans are you using typically?
Right now, my favorite bean is Mukilteo Roasters.
Okay.
The Monorail Espresso Blend.
Okay.
Because underneath the monorail in the old days, down at Nordstrom's,
Yes.
was a monorail espresso.
Yes, it was.
And they had great coffee.
Yes, they did.
And I lived in a loft about a half a block away.
Okay.
And which my loft era. That's another story.
That's another story.
and which started a whole lot of the then famous bands.
Okay.
Because I was old school at that point.
Okay.
And they were kids, and I let them rehearse in my place. So that includes Mother Love Bone and the Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains. So there's stories there, but that's because of my lofts, not because of my musical.
Okay.
Oh, I was using it for my music.
Sure.
But I also made friends with one of the drummer out of Love Bone, Greg Gilmore, is still a dear friend of mine.
Okay.
They became Love Bone. They became Pearl Jam.
Right.
When Andrew died, which I went through that with Greg. So I was there in that time frame. They were working in my studio, practicing. And anyway, so that I digress. So Mukilteo Roasters, I discovered through a bass player friend of mine. He said, it's the only stuff. That's it. And I tasted his coffee, and it was my aesthetic, that dark and rich, but not sharp.
Okay.
And so I've since become friends with Gary Smith, the Mukilteo Roaster guy, and he's an old musician that we know everybody in the world and in this world. Right. And we were probably in the same room a dozen times and didn't know it. And he knew of me, and he's over on Woodby Island, and Mukilteo Roasters, that's their base. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it used to be a Mukilteo. I don't know, but now it's on Woodby. No. And so I discovered, that's where I discovered it is on a teeny little airport. Like a little airport, looks like somebody's driveway. I'm a pilot, private pilot.
So did you fly in to get your beans?
Absolutely.
And that's economically viable.
Yeah, that's a $300 bag of beans. And so I'll go in, and that's where I met Gary, and we started realizing we know everybody collectively that's in this immediate scene, and his mentor, and I guess partner maybe, but certainly mentor, was Dave Stewart. So his aesthetic is that. So it's no wonder. So it's one and the same. There's his blend, Mukilteo. I mean, he has several. He has a Happy Hippie, which is a great blend.
It's very good.
In roast. And Monorail Espresso, which is their kind of sister. They're the same, but not.
Right.
And either one's great.
Okay. All right. Well, we hijacked that thread. Well, let's. Oh boy.
I'm sorry.
No. I warned you. This is how the show goes.
Okay.
I mean, we're gonna, it's not scripted, so it goes where it goes. And coffee can lead any conversation, as far as I'm concerned.
So, I had Ed Liebrick.
Okay.
When I opened my coffee shop in Hollywood, when I moved down there in the 90s,
Okay.
Nobody knew they wanted coffee. Come in, wanted coffee, black or white. That's British, but black or with cream.
Mm-hmm.
And I built a coffee shop and had Ed shoot me down his house blend, which was my cup of tea.
Right.
And he sent me down a fresh, 5-pound bag regularly. And it was damn near warm still when I got it. And so I had the best coffee in LA. And people from San Francisco and New York and Chicago and Europe who are in LA trying to make a name for themselves, they knew right away. They'd come in and I'd make them a doppio. There's Vito's. There's a couple of really good cafes around here. Vito's is one because they made their espresso. Their single shot is really a ristretto doppio, so which is restricted. Ristretto is a short shot. Mm-hmm. That's what the word means, restricted. And then it's really a doppio. So it is like nectar. Oh, it's great. It's a good one. Okay. And they have their own coffee. But Ed's Lighthouse was just wonderful. But I always made a really rich shot of coffee. And guys that were new, that would say, I'm from New York. Actors coming in trying to make a name for themselves. I say, how do you like your espresso? I said, never mind. Just start with this so you taste our coffee. I'll give you a shot. And I would make it a double ristretto. Just float it. And everybody loved us because it was the best coffee. It was not, it wasn't an aluminum beverage, or it wasn't. Some people were still doing cappuccinos with a scoop of something out of a jar. So it was not there. There was one Starbucks in LA at the Century Plaza or something. That was in Century City. It was a Starbucks. But people would come in, famous people, because the coffee shop was in Theater Row, which is equity waiver, 99 seats or less, little black boxes, houses, some fancy, most not, of where people keep their acting skills up. Equity people in TV and film who are out of work will come into the better equity waiver theaters and just keep working their craft. They'll get into good houses and rehearse, and they always have a second because if they get a job, they're gone. So their second will take their spot in that equity waived theater production. Mm-hmm. I had stuck a cafe right in the middle of those dozen theaters over about a half a block, where little theaters all around us. And I called it the in-between. It was in between them all. And all of those people, if they're from another city, immediately, we'd be packed.
And you put your piano in there.
Yeah, and that's all it fit, almost. And it was a long, skinny thing, and I put it in, and we had, modular kind of, as if this was a bench or just a stool. I had a bunch of those everywhere, so it was sitting low and little tables, and it was totally Seattle. The blackboard with, and they hadn't seen any of that shit. And people would come in and, where to start? Well, what comes to mind was Michael Bolton was seeing, who was the girl? What was her name? She ended up being in Desperate Housewives, and then she was in one of the Terminators, and then she did, you'd know her name in a minute. Pretty girl, brunette.
I'm drawing a complete blank.
Yeah, no, and yeah, it'll come around. But she and Michael Bolton were going out at the time. She happened to be in a production because she was in between shows, and the Hudson Theater, right to one of my sides, they were surrounded by theaters, was kind of the best one of the bunch. The well-heeled, beautifully rendered, so it was very professional. It wasn't just a black box with a few lights.
Mm-hmm.
It was a full tilt production facility. And so that would draw the out-of-work TV actors and film actors who would come in and get agents to come and see them, and just, they'd work it. So there was that kind of buzz, and there was rehearsals during the day. So the place was full during the day. And then at night, after the show was over, which was, 10 or something, 8 to 10 were their shows or something like that, I'd start doing music. And because there was a 9-foot, and I was part of the schedule, I did weekly or daily evening music, and I'd plug myself into the schedule. And then as soon as the word got out that there was this little cafe that'd pay you something out of the till, and they didn't mind that. They were just wanting to, again, show themselves in LA, in Hollywood. And there was a grand piano, a serious grand piano with a nice set of lights and sound sitting in this really funky little cool cafe. And the owner would rather insist that you do your own music. He didn't want it to turn into a piano bar. And so that was my rule. I said, people would come in and I'd say, well, this is for original music. And a lot of that goes on down there because that's what they're after.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't trying to be a piano bar. They were there to show off their stuff, and then they would try and have agents or managers or what have yous come in. And so they were, that scene, and that was a fun time. I still work with a number of the people I met out of that, in my film and TV work.
Wow.
So that was in the 90s. And then I moved back up here. We bought a house on Bainbridge Island, and I was involved in a studio production, and my wife and I went our separate ways, and I had a couple of kids, and actually we're still really good friends. Thank goodness. And but we were on different roads, and I moved back to LA because that's where my phone was ringing, And shortly thereafter, my youngest son called me up and asked me, he said, Dad, can I come live with you? Because his older son was probably a little heavy-handed on him, now that he was the man in the house. And the youngster was quiet and reserved, and the elder was the opposite. And I said, sure. So he moved down. It was, dad and son in L.A., in Studio City we lived. And that's where I got into film and TV song placement. Was that my best friend has done it all through he worked for BMG, and he pulled me in to be his kind of creative guy, because we had played. He was the drummer in Bridges, so we had known each other since the 70s. So we knew each other's ear, and we could look at each other and know what we were thinking about music, and say green, and we both had the same green in our mind.
Okay.
We wanted blue, but not too, and we both knew what that meant. Okay. Or it's got to be this, but not a little more. A little more mustard. Okay. So that taught me that business. And then I went on the road with Dan Reed. Dan Reed Network out of Portland was a funky, hard-hitting rascal. And he had a couple of big hits in the late 80s.
How did you get connected with Dan Reed?
Art Ford, my same friend from Drummer in Bridges, to BMG's in charge of their film and TV music placement on the publishing side for the world, pulled me in to help that and produce events, and we did Sundance, and so that's they're in. But he knew Dan from Portland because Art was from Eugene, and he just knew the Dan Reed Network. I didn't, although we had met back when Dan was climbing the ladder. He would come up here and play, what was that place down under the monorail? Anyway, one of the big clubs downtown. And I almost had it. It was a Greek restaurant for a while. Anyway, and a lot of people played there because it was kind of the big club in town with Aquarius being the big club north of town.
Right.
And Dan was in there playing, and, lying around the block. He was well known.
Mm-hmm.
And my loft was another loft was downtown, one near the monorail that where I frequent, and that was close to Astor Park.
Yep.
Thank you. And after Dan Reed played Astor Park, and I didn't even go. I had my 9-foot piano there. So that was an event production, performance gallery that had its stories in there too. But, and I lived there. And he brought Dan over after the show. And we hung out and I played, and Dan, there was a guitar around. I don't think he brought his. And we just clicked. And he'd sing and play something, and I'd just play right on it. And so fast forward, when I moved to L.A., Dan had come down there. It was great to see him and reconnected, and we played in my studio. I had a studio with Art and a friend of ours who is one of the kind of upper echelon in film and TV music in LA. We had a studio. We've had two through the years, actually. And I used it. They were working during the day. I used it for production stuff, practice and production stuff. And Dan came along, and I helped him do a song of his. I played and recorded it for him in our little studio, and it was just magic. And he said, wow, this is great. He said, I've got some dates in Europe this summer. You want to go? I go, yeah.
Sure.
And it became a long and still connected career. I've done a couple of albums with him, and I have gone last time. It's been a little while now, 3 or 4 years. Of course, it's been 2 years before any of us traveled. So it's been a few years now since I've been over there. And I would go over and do one. I was playing with, not the network. He had a Dan Reed band that was a lot of those songs, the hit songs, but done differently. And we kind of did them funky in our own thing. We weren't trying to do the record.
Okay.
And it was well traveled, and that was so much fun. That was the first time really in kind of my professional life that I did Europe, and was traveling along with the band, bouncing along in either a rented van we had or on the train, and crisscrossing the UK and going up to Scotland, and then bouncing up to the Scandinavia and crisscrossing. And I've crisscrossed and playing the smallest little burgs in Sweden you want to know. And then some of the big halls. And then we would do festivals too, the big festivals in the summertime. Because he was known over there. Because when the network hit in the late 80s out of Portland, where they really hit was not U.S. They were in whatever the label was. There's a London office too for that label, and then, and maybe still, if you were big in L.A. or the label in L.A. was jumping up and down about you, they were cautious until they heard you and thought for themselves.
Okay. So
So they knew their market. And Dan Reed, funky rock and roll thing, hard hitting, kind of 4 on the floor, but with a guitar hero, Brian, who in fact, he sat in with me about 2 months ago. I mean, I'm still in touch with Brian. Oh, and all those guys really. And they sent it to Joni Metcalf in not Arista. Anyway, one of the labels, big label. And she was the head of A&R. And she always had a stack of CDs like this that she never got to, of new acts. And then this came over, but this was a separate act list because it came over from her label, Los Angeles version. And her dad came in every week and brought a pile of stuff because he loved listening. And so he was her listener. And he heard Dan Reed and brought it to her attention immediately. Said, you're going to like this. This kid's good. And they were hard hitting, and she just dug it. And so they signed him up. And and brought them over, and their first gig was opening for the Stones at Wembley Stadium. And they went on and did the European tour. And so he's well known in Europe. And one of those was platinum. Maybe the second was too, I'm not sure. And then that ran its course. Grunge and depressed, hard-hitting rock and roll took over from Guy Gets Girl spandex pants. Poignant, important topics that were done seriously instead of wanking, hairdo. And Dan was a blend of that.
Right. To
be fair to Dan, they were serious as a heart attack, but the material was light. It was, girl in a red dress, tiger in a red dress. And it was all about Guy Gets Girl. And he has since got much more pointed and poignant in his material. That kind of turned off like a switch. And he went into electronica, and he got out of the business for a while just because it was ending up being too self-destructive for himself. So he decided to just kind of disappear for a while, and then he discovered that music and writing music and playing is what he wants to do, so he came back in.
Okay.
And that's where I reconnected with him in that second life of his. And it was in Europe because he was living over there. He lives in Prague. He's been out of the country, expat, for a long time. And we're still in touch, very, very much. So coming off of one of those tours, I was here seeing Mom, not living in LA anymore, because I was over there most of the time. And then he'd have me do dates with the band, and we'd also do house concerts, just him and me, which was much more lucrative. So we could both, bank better on that. And that was just so much fun. So I came home and I was hanging, and that's when I met Michael. And I was just going to go back over with no real plans. I mean, I was still doing stuff with Dan, but it was a lot easier if I was over there for him to get me for a weekend for a $200 ticket instead of a $1,200.
Right.
So it's like from here to LA. It's easier if you're here than if I was in London working in LA. Anyway, here I am. Michael corralled me, and I still come and go. I did. Last summer, I did a wonderful set of concerts in Vienna, where a woman who was a fan of my morning rendezvous, we'll get to, or maybe come into this after, but from these morning rendezvous, I've met some people around the world, and there's one gal in Austria is an artist, and really actually an amazing artist. And she became a fan and a friend, and we connected. And she said, yeah, I sent her my albums, and she played them for some people. And a conservatory was just quite taken by it and said, we'd love to have him come over and do a concert. So she hosted me, and the conservatory gave me a date, gave me a concert. So over I went. This was like in June past, and then she set up another house concert with an artist in Vienna. One was a little out of Vienna, about an hour out down the Danube. And then the other was in one of the old town, close to Beethoven's old hang. The top floor of this old beautiful, apartment, and piano in it. And so I did both concerts. And it was just magic. And it's hard to explain, but Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn and Chopin, especially Beethoven and Mozart, they were Vienna. I mean, that was the, king of the hill. That was rock. That was the stardom, was in Vienna. And then you'd go elsewhere. Chopin would got his chops in Vienna, and then went back to Paris. But the fact that my roots were more Vienna than they were Seattle or LA or Chicago or New Orleans or Nashville these were not my roots
Right.
aesthetically. It was Vienna. And I could feel that. My hair was standing up for the whole time. And they've asked me back. The conservatory wants me to do a residency, and which is work with the kids on improv, because it's all my material. I mean, it might be, some of it's set.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it isn't. It's heads and themes and patterns and images. And then I stretch and go away and come back.
Okay.
And and she could spot that in a minute, because we were rehearsed in the theater there. And the gal that runs the place, a dear woman, she became a friend. And so the residency will be improv for whoever wants to be involved. And then I'll do a weekly concert.
And when will this be taking place?
Well, it was supposed to be done in December,
Mm-hmm.
but they got locked down again.
Right.
So it's sometime this year.
Okay.
Probably. I mean, I don't mind not being in Vienna, or having to trudge along, getting to and from Vienna in Austrian winters. Now they don't mind. Like when I was in Sweden for many a winter,
Mm-hmm.
and you're up to your waist, but nobody minds, because that's their life and they deal with it.
Right.
And I got pretty good at dealing with it. I'd be there, but I don't mind it being later spring or summer.
Okay.
Just saying.
All right. My daughter lives in Telfs.
I don't know that.
It's just out of Innsbruck.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. It's about 20 minutes or so from
Wow.
Innsbruck. It's a little town. And yeah, she's...
What's the other? Where Alessandra is the artist, Steiner, a wonderful visual artist. And we did a collaboration that was her visual painting that she chose over the pieces
Mm-hmm.
that she became to know, became knowing or of,
Mm-hmm.
aware of. And so we created this digital environment where she projected on the entire stage
Okay.
while I performed to my song with that image, and it sat over it. And a wonderful trick that's just a cheap thrill is, and I did this in my lofts, because you get great big white parachutes and drape them over everything. And if there's any lumps, like a piano is a lump,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a backdrop, it becomes this 2D, 3D environment you project from the front. It's like a pop-up gift card where, something pops up, and as you're looking low straight at it, it has dimension. You see in front, and, front's a tree and the back's the sky or something. So there is relief. And the same thing happens on stage. And so it's just wonderfully cheap. And, you get white whatevers
Right.
and drape it on the back. And then I drop it over the piano, and I wore all white. So here I'm immersed in the image. And people just loved it. The place was packed. But back to the roots. They were very comfortable with my progressively neoclassical bent,
Okay.
because I run. And I'll fly up and down and sideways and cross and just have fun. And, they hung on every note. I was so tickled, because that's not always the case. If I'm playing a club in Seattle, I'm careful what songs I pick. If I'm getting, too esoteric, it won't hold the crowd. It'll hold people near me, because people who want to come and hear me will come up close. And then if I throw hell to the wind, I'll play to them anyway. And if it's something light and pretty, if I get too light and pretty in some clubs, it gets stepped on, because people aren't ready for that unless they're really there to listen to whatever I give them.
Okay.
And in some clubs, that's not the case. They're coming in for, other reasons. But boy, did I feel that in Vienna. That's my point.
Okay.
I just felt that connection, and I'm excited to go back.
COVID.
Yeah, that stopped it.
Kind of tired of that word. Tired of asking the questions of everybody. Like, what did you do during COVID? But
Right.
it's real. But your morning rendezvous.
Started because.
Right. Why don't you explain that to the listeners so that they have an idea, and we'll make sure that they can find you. But let's talk about that.
Well, along came, the lockdown, and I live right next to the studio, and which has a magnificent piano in it. And I've been, that was 2 years ago, and I've been here a good almost 10. So, so two things, and I'm careful to speak with this. I know this is public, but I'll speak to it, with my appreciation of it being my situation. And I have friends and family that this is not the case. But with me, most of my life is somewhat monastic and a bit of a hermit, where I'm, eat, sleep, piano. Mm-hmm. And with this environment, I've been able to get up and come in here early and practice, put my hours in, playing, practicing, writing, recording, and then get out of the way of the studio if they've got a day, something. Mm-hmm. And then their day's done, and I'll come in late at night, go off into the wee hours, and practice and play and record. And just me. I mean, I don't turn it into a party. I'm careful that way. I just don't run that way. When I do a recording session, I like it to be a closed session, which just means me and who's essential to be here. Mm-hmm. I don't want, girlfriends and friends of friends and turn it into a party. I might have a party at the end of it, but closed session, it keeps me focused and quiet, and you're controlling the air. But so along came COVID, and in truth, my situation didn't change much, because I was still waking up, eat, sleep, come in here, and but we all had to be careful elsewhere. So, anyway, Raymond, all of our friends were doing things, streaming with their PayPals and their Venmos to try and keep making money.
Yeah.
And then, keep their crowd entertained, and hopefully their crowd would, slide them $20 on PayPal. And that became an approach that a lot of people did. And it was fun. I was touched. I was touched by seeing people doing that. And I thought it was great, and I'd chime in, I'd watch and some of it, and let them know I was here, and say, just, back them up. And Raymond, Keybro, I call him. We're all Keybros. If you play Keybro, if you play keyboard, you're a Keybro.
Gotcha.
And I met him when I moved home. So it's been inside of 10 years we've been friends, and friends right away. I mean, he's just such a wonderful, open book, and, big-hearted man. It's easy to be friends with that man.
That compliment paid for by the Friends of Raymond Hayden Foundation. I agree. He's
a good man.
He's a good man.
And he's Mr. Tacoma. And so part of it, he plugged me into Tacoma. He pulled me down there, and in my band up here that we've played far too occasionally, but and because everybody's busy in the rest of their world, mm-hmm. but called Dream Wreck. Has Ben Smith in it, Rod Cook, John Bayless, and that's a hell of a band. And Raymond dug the band, and he got us booked down there, and then that in turn got me some solo things down there, and we've been friends since. We had this thing called the Evening of Keys, which was a handful of piano players, and I immediately got adopted into that. So we would do 4 or 5 piano players go up and do 20 minutes.
Okay.
And, so along came COVID, and here I sat, and he was just doing what I do. And Raymond said, wait, what do you think about going? You should, push go and go online, get out there, and, everybody will come check you out. And I thought about it. I said, well, yeah, why not? I'm just doing what I do. Open up the door. And so he helped me do a little event thing. And we first called it Breakfast with Brooke, because I decided to do it in the morning. Okay. Because the people, I got nowhere to go. and nor at night either. But a lot of people were doing nights, and it just felt right to do something in the morning because I was in here practicing anyway. And so he helped me, with those event things and got that going, and started just a few days after that idea because Easter was just right around the corner. And so that's when I started, and I started going every day for about a year, every day. And I'd start taking a day off, because I couldn't go anywhere. Nobody was going. It wasn't like, any other choice really. And I'm doing this every day anyway, so why not? And that the rendezvous, I call them les vous, the group of people are I'm not doing every day. I'll do it now, of course, with the construction here. My mornings are toast, so I'm not doing mornings. So what I'll do is the weekend.
Okay.
Or I might do a later midnight rendezvous, evening rendezvous. And everything quiets down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm doing a little bit more, a bit spontaneous, and put out a quick event, and the same core group of people show up.
So
and
where are you putting these on at?
The church.
Well,
how so?
Where are you streaming them to?
Whoever wants to listen.
On
Facebook.
Facebook. Okay.
On my page.
Okay.
And Facebook Live.
Okay.
And which is amazing because I do it. My entire technical, setup is my phone. Now I have an advantage because the phone, it's a Galaxy, and it's nothing fancy. Well, it's their top of the line Galaxy, but which happens to have a great little camera and a pretty hefty little microphone. So, which is amazing in itself, frankly. I mean, what the heck? And so I set it up looking down the keyboard, and it's about 1.5 feet away from an awesome piano. So it's going to sound good. Mm-hmm. I mean, it just can't help but sound good. If it's in tune, you hear it. If it's not, you hear that. But it sounds big and full. And then the room, the sanctuary in the church is gorgeous. So I just, by chance, have a great sounding instrument. And then I sing a little bit too. And I just turn, kind of poke my head, look toward, lean in a little bit to the camera and, tell the story and get out and come back over here and play. So it's mostly piano. But I tell the story in some of my songs because ain't nobody here else to do it, so I do.
And those have been well received.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done, what's that? 365 days a year. It's been 2. So I probably have 400 or 500 shows under my belt.
Okay.
And the same bunch, it has, now that they've let us out of prison a little bit, the turnout is a lot less than initially. But I'm just here for who wants to show up. I'm okay with if it's not a couple of thousand people showing up if it's 100. Mm-hmm. And then with the little legs behind that, I keep everything on my site, mm-hmm. On the Facebook, so that people can revisit it if they want to. And they always do, people. So all of a sudden in a week, I got 2 or 3 or 4 more times more people than were there the day I did it.
That's amazing.
Because they come back and it'll happen. I have friends in LA that will either tune in when I do it, mm-hmm. or they know that there's something on my site and they'll turn me on and just have it in their office and not sit and be involved in the chatter. Because a lot of people come there, they've made friends with the other rendezvous. So their friend horizon has expanded to people all over around the world. And they're chatting, and I don't pay a lot of attention when I'm playing because I'd be distracted. It would, my focus, so I'll play and I know that they're listening, but then they're engaging with who, and so I've created this space for them. And so I have to and choose to let them do what they want. We only have a couple of rules. No news.
Thank you.
No news. This is our no news hour of love, and nothing negative. This is not a pity party. This is not a prayer group. I understand we all go through things where we want a little help or a little pat on the back. And if that's the case, take it off of here. This is not for that. We're here for the music and just for love and to connection. We're gathering. We started this gathering when they told us not to. So it allowed us to gather at a time when we were told not to. I mean, figuratively speaking, because nobody could get together and sit around the piano and listen to somebody play for an hour, hour and a half.
So how much longer do you think you'll do this?
And I don't see any end. I'm coming into our 2nd year anniversary. So, and because I'm playing anyway, because I'm practicing. I mean, at my age, I have to play every day. I just do. And I practice and, bust my butt and go through my exercises. There's couple of exercise books I use. One, and they're all 200 years old. And, not literally my printed page, but their author.
Really?
And because they're classical. And that just, it's like calisthenics. There's only, it is calisthenics.
How many hours a week are you practicing?
Well,
and I mean practice, not the rendezvous. So practice.
Well, the rendezvous, what's interesting is that it is still that fast and flying and flowing, what I call neoclassical. And I mean, I play funky and rootsy and I got some, reggae in me and I got some gospel in me. So it's not all esoteric, classically, sounding. It's just not. I cover a wide range that way. But so even the rendezvous are challenging because I'm playing, there's no tomorrow.
Okay.
So I include that in my rehearsal.
Okay.
But so I do 2 hours in front of that. So there's 3 hours in the morning and then at least 3 at night, 4 usually. And so, so that's 6-7 hours a day. And, but it's what I do. And at the moment I don't have a girlfriend or a wife or a dog. So, so I can, it's what I do. And thankful for it. Very thankful for it. And I mentioned that I'm careful, having, been very thankful for kind of this turn of events that has maybe something to do, but not in my heart, anything to do with COVID. But it is related to everybody being, locked down. That it instigated this, my opening up my doors so people could come in on what I'm doing anyway.
Right. All right. Question I love to ask musicians. 2-part question. Washington State related. And for you, I'm going to pare you down. Can't say somewhere in LA or somewhere in Europe. Maybe you can slide those in, but like to do, because we're exploring Washington State. As a performer, the coolest venue you've played at?
Theater or club?
Anywhere.
Well, the theaters, there are several. I mean, the Paramount's wonderful.
Okay.
Kirkland's Performance Theater is lovely. Played there a number of times. There's an Everett Theater, the classic old something. And it's fun. Clubs. I found out about it through Raymond, the one Louis G's.
Which is closed now.
Oh, is it now?
It's gone.
That was a Shangri-La. That was hiding. Its stage and sound system. They didn't have a piano.
Right.
I mean, the first handful have gorgeous pianos that I mentioned, because that's otherwise I have a fine digital piece of great several, and thank goodness because they work great, but it's not an acoustic piano. It's not playing a Steinway 7 or 9 foot piano.
All right.
So let's see, where else? There's a little club out north called the North City Bistro. And the Blooms own that. And they're sweethearts.
Okay.
And he's a musician and he picks and chooses the music that plays there. And it's a little wine bar, so it's unassuming. but they're so accommodating. We've become really close friends. I'll go in there with a friend of mine, has me come in, and he's a blues harp player, singer, and he plays with various guys in a band situation. But short of that, he will ask me, and we'll go in and just the two of us play a couple of sets each and then combine in one set. So I'll take the middle set and have it be what I do. It'll be like a rendezvous. In fact, done it a time or two where I'll set up and stream the rendezvous.
Okay.
From there on that night. And, but because we're in Seattle, when we advertise, those people show up.
Right.
Because now they can get out. We can get out now.
Part 2 of the question.
Oh, side note. Still, Ray has a lovely piano. He has, it's an upright, so it looks unassuming, but Yamaha makes a series that's a U. It's the nomenclature. It's a U series that are great.
Okay.
They're a great piano. Well, for what it is. But it doesn't sound like a little spinet that grandma puts the pictures on. It actually has some beef and some voice, and it's lovely. So it's a fine instrument to play a nice short set on.
Okay. Part 2 of that is where have you seen music performed in the area that you've enjoyed from the audience standpoint?
Sea Monster.
Sea Monster. Not familiar with that.
Yeah, it's if we were 21, it'd be our favorite club.
Okay.
Because it's funky, jazzy, improv, and then some not. But they are serious on the improv original, what you do. If you're good and funky and jazzy, come on in. And Joe Doria is kind of, holds court there. And Joe's a local organ god.
Okay.
He's over the top good.
Okay.
And the Jimmy Smith B3 throws the pedals like he grew up on them, probably did, and is ridiculous. And he has great players with him consequently. And they're just flying, not even looking at each other. So it is funky, jazzy, tear it up, 15-minute songs. I'm all about that. I can get that.
Okay.
And Joe, he's kind of, like I say, he holds court there. He has played there once a week for years. And so certainly the Sea Monster.
Okay.
And let's see, where else? I don't go out much.
Well, we're about
I'm a total homebody.
Go back in the day. So like you mentioned Astor Park.
Yeah, that would be one of the kind of the rock halls. Jazz Alley is a jazz hall. Langston Hughes is the R&B. The African American community lives and thrives through that hall.
Okay.
They have the gospel and the R&B and the funk, and it's just beautiful. That's a real home for that music. Let's see, where else?
Well, let me ask you this question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, because like right now, there's a bunch of places you go. It's like that you go see. I go see people that I know, and they're my friends.
Sure.
So I go there for them.
Okay.
And I might not, want to come back to this club next weekend unless I know you.
Okay. Where haven't you played that you'd like to play?
I haven't played Jazz Alley.
Okay.
And I'd enjoy that. Now, I'm not real. I'm different for Jazz Alley.
Sure.
But I know John Demetrios.
Yes.
Dimitri?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I know him. The first Jazz Alley was in the U District. With his wife then. And my loft was about 2.5 blocks up 45th or up University Way from him. And he'd come up and hang out. And when I was having shows and things, so that's what I met him through that. And, but I never asked him to play Jazz Alley. Well, he actually has a guidebook in it. Because I was never, straight out jazz.
Okay.
And, but I would enjoy that because they have a nice instrument.
Okay.
And, where else would I want to play? Well, I've done shows here. And people don't know what this looks like, but it's a beautiful venue.
Yes, it is.
And it's a beautiful sanctuary that seats about. Am I too far away? You okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I'm sitting back.
It's okay.
I've done a number of shows here that we'd fill the place. And filling here isn't much. It's probably 175 people.
Right. But still.
Yeah, that's a nice crowd.
It's a nice crowd.
And even 100 is fine. They're not quite so sardines because we still have the pews.
Mm-hmm.
And pews are godly, excuse the pun, uncomfortable.
Yes, they are.
Or is that ungodly?
Either way.
Yeah. And so we packed it, and it's a little bit shoulder to shoulder. And so 75 or 100 is better, and that's easy to gather.
Okay.
And but that hasn't been during COVID.
Okay.
Where else? Where else would I like to play?
You ever played the triple door?
Yes, thank you. A number of times. Okay. And both their side room, where I have to bring a piano, and the big one where they have that lovely Steinway.
Mm-hmm.
I've played it a number of times. It's fine. It's just fine.
It's funny. I ask that question to most of the guests that are musicians, right? And the triple door is almost everybody's choice. It's so funny to me. It's like I don't know what I expected, but the triple door rises up from that. Where do you want to play? Like as a performer, people say the triple door. Where do you like to see music being performed? People say the triple door. They've done a great job there.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine a dear friend that I've, Richard Russell is his name. He's a singer-songwriter, and I've met him through being asked to do the keyboards on his number of albums. So through the years, we've become friends musically, and he's a philanthropist and was very much involved in the triple door existing.
Okay.
And they do a fundraiser for the Port Townsend Blues Society, something like that. And it's an annual thing and a big fundraiser at the Triple Door. And Richard's always invited to perform because he is. Mm-hmm. He's kind of responsible for it. And he brings his band. He's living in Hawaii, and he brings his band over, and I'll play keyboards with him.
Okay.
And he'll give me a middle kind of minor set of my own material.
Oh, okay.
So I'll stretch out.
Okay.
And anytime I play with Richard, he'll give me the band will leave the stage and I'll take it for a minute.
Okay.
Triple door is fun.
Okay. Well, I want to respect your time because you got to get back to practicing. What? Two questions. Well, one's more of a statement. Question. We could go on and on and on. I mean, I know we skipped over a bunch of stuff. But what didn't I ask you that I probably should have asked you?
Well, let's see. That's an interesting question. Because we've just covered some stuff, kind of my past. And what's interesting is that, and you don't know this, but kind of discovering the feeling that I've discovered and felt for the first time that I was in Vienna was real interesting. Because my roots, of course those are my roots, because that was the first music I learned, and it wasn't, the pop stuff or the rock stuff or the R&B back then. Mm-hmm. And so that was interesting, but we covered that because that's new in my life.
Okay.
The COVID, the morning rendezvous, mm-hmm. or rendezvous if it's in the evening rendezvous. If it's late, I call it the midnight rendezvous. That's 2 years old, so that's a new part of my moment, mm-hmm. which is just including people in kind of what I do. But it's really, so consequently, it's like it's been one of the most prolific times of my life.
Really?
Because I'm cranking out stuff every day.
Okay.
And it has generated 2, and I'm on the verge of a 3rd album in 2 years.
Wow.
So it's really created, and all the stuff isn't on there that, I feel could be on, because I picked and chose. And that'll continue. And So let's see, what haven't you asked? Well, that's it. I just, this is what I do, and it's continuing, and I'm very thankful for it.
Okay. So if people want to listen to your music, they want to attend. Where can people find out more about you? Are you just on Facebook, or do you have other sources?
My name is Brooke Lizotte, and there's a 1 after it.
Okay.
Because there are a few Brooke Lizottes, and they're all girls, because my Brooke has an E after it.
Okay.
And that, in fast forward, of course, my mom decided that a long time ago. But she must have liked the way it looks, because masculine is K, Brooke, or S, Brooks Brothers Suits. So Brooke, K, S with the S, and E is feminine. So all of my mail comes as Ms., because the post office, their
infinite wisdom,
their systems and others, and just any postal system, they'll flip a coin for masculine or feminine. So the Terrys and the Alex and the who else? What other can toe the line like that? Brooke is one, although it's spelled differently. But there's others like Terry with a RRY or RI.
RR, yeah.
Or what have you.
Pat.
Oh, yeah.
I just remember the old Saturday Night Live skit for Pat. So.
Right, don't call me Shirley.
Well, I thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
This was great for me. And we'll put links in the show notes so that people can find you.
Oh, I was going to say, I have a YouTube channel.
Oh, okay.
And that shows a lot of the stuff I've done on film too.
Okay.
Some of the artists, the pieces I did for the Sony Pictures things, and so that includes things that are not my material that I'm playing on though.
Okay.
The work I've done with Randy Meisner from the Eagles.
Oh, really?
And one of our pieces is on there.
Okay.
And so they'll see the film and TV side of me.
Excellent.
And then a bunch of my materials on there too. And then,
are you on any, do you make sure there's nothing you can throw at me? Okay. Are you on any of the streaming service? Is your music on Spotify?
Yes, it is on all of those.
Okay.
And of course that's digital. And I have a small bit of CDs in case people want CDs, because I got those really for the Rendezvous people, because almost all of them bought a CD or both from me, because I could sign it, and it's a memory piece.
Sure.
I mean, CDs and hats, and I don't have hats or T-shirts, but when you go somewhere, pop for a 20, 40, 60, all of a sudden you're spending $100 or $200 at the merch, but it's a memory piece for that night.
Absolutely.
So the Rendezvous people, almost all of them have chose to have a CD. Okay. So they remember being there when that was recorded, because it was recorded live at the Rendezvous one of those days.
Oh, very nice. Okay.
And so that they would have to come to me directly.
Okay. And
that could be done if they're a Facebooker, PM me and say, if you want a CD, then we make arrangements aside. Okay. But they can also download from any of their favorite sites.
Okay. Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a real treat. And thank you. We both can thank Kebro, Raymond.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. That's enough. We'll pat him on the back.
There we go.
But,
we don't want his head to get too.
But this has been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.